Following my Star Trek Discovery review, a review of the Orville seemed obvious, and many of you asked for my thoughts on it. I've seen the first 3 episodes now, and generally my response is positive enough. Going into this, I had some reservations. The trailers didn't grab me, but I figured it was pretty clever of Fox to commission a quasi-Star Trek parody when Netflix had just launched a dreary, dark, and lifeless reanimated corpse of a Star Trek spin-off in the form of Discovery. The beauty of parody, pastiche, and spoof comedy is that there's no pressure for it to outdo the original work it's sending up. It just has to be reasonably entertaining. The pressure is on Star Trek Discovery to perform as a worthy successor in the franchise. That being said, prior to watching the first episode of The Orville, I'd heard mixed reports from people on Twitter. Most seemed to enjoy it, but there was a number of folks who were disappointed, and I can understand why. I think people were expecting a show that contained Seth MacFarlane's trademark fast-paced Family Guy-style wit, along with a dose of Galaxy Quest. That's not really what this is. It's certainly a Star Trek-style spoof, and the show successfully mocks many of the cliches and conventions of the space sci-fi genre, but it's not really a parody in the strictest Galaxy Quest sense. This is a comedy drama inspired heavily by Star Trek, and that makes for a subtle difference. The trouble with this kind of show is that The Orville is obviously a derivative work, and therefore its identity is based upon a pre-existing property, which is constantly in the back of the viewer's mind. So it's obviously going to take some time for the show to establish its own sense of itself. But that's just my opinion. This is only the second time I've seen Seth MacFarlane in a live-action role, the first being A Million Ways to Die in the West, and I actually think The Orville suffers a little bit in the same way that movie did. I actually found the film to be entertaining enough, even though it didn't get particularly good reviews, but it's one of those movies where if you watch individual funny scenes and clips from the film, you find them funny, but when you put it all together, it doesn't quite work as a movie. The difference with The Orville being a series is that it can have a crap episode one week, and then it can put it all right the next week. The show isn't a rip-roaring belly-laugh comedy. It's really just a lighthearted, fairly self-aware comedy sci-fi drama, and therefore your expectations have to be set accordingly. That said, it's a lot more fun to watch than Discovery, and genuinely feels like a truer successor to Star Trek canon, which should alarm CBS Paramount no end, considering their own product feels very divorced from its origin. The Orville mixes a classic Star Trek feel, but to me, it felt closer to something like Star Trek Voyager in tone, albeit better than Voyager. I especially felt this by the 3rd episode, which is called About a Girl, which, given its bland moral quandary story and procedural courtroom scene at the end, felt like it could have been pulled right out of Voyager's 6th or 7th season. I enjoyed the pilot episode quite a bit, and the character of Captain Ed Mercer is a likable guy with relatable flaws. The idea of making his ex-wife his first officer feels more than a bit sitcomish, but it does create a few comedic and character-developing moments to be sufficiently acceptable. The rest of the cast make solid contributions, like Penny Johnson-Gerald, who plays the ship's doctor, Claire Finn, best known for playing Cassidy Yates on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The stock, stoic alien character is Commander Bortus, a Moclan. He's a little bit Worf, a little bit Tuvok and Teal'c. Lieutenant Catan is a young security chief with super strength. The helmsman is the show's wacky idiot savant pilot and general wisecracking jerk, Lieutenant Malloy. His friend and co-navigator is Lieutenant John Lamar. And then there's an artificial life form called Isaac, from a race known for being a little bit racist. What I was pleased to see immediately in the opening credits was that there's a lot of Star Trek alumni involved with this production, which should help to remain more true to the franchise than the actual franchise is nowadays. Perhaps CBS Paramount should have realized that if you effectively ban or heavily restrict fans from producing Star Trek fan films, they'll just go ahead and produce parodies instead that, if produced in the right manner, can actually be more true to the spirit of the series than the modern official canon. McFarlane, being a massive Star Trek fan, enlisted the help of long-term Star Trek writers, producers, and directors like Andre Bormanis, Brannon Braga, Robert Duncan McNeill, and Jonathan Frakes, and the show's tone, direction, cinematography, and pretty decent visual effects are much more in keeping with a 90s Star Trek series. In the first episode, the story is pretty rushed, given how the show has to establish the protagonist's backstory, introduce all the characters and the ship, and then the main plot. It really doesn't truly begin till the halfway point. This is, of course, no fault of the writers, it's just that they only had 1 hour of a pilot to work with. Thankfully, as this is a Star Trek parody, it doesn't really need to work hard to establish the universe. It's taken for granted that the viewer understands that the Union is basically a stand-in for the United Federation of Planets. Basically, the crew of the Orville have to stop the Krill from getting their hands on a piece of technology that can accelerate time within a fixed location. Such a device could be used as a weapon, so Mercer and co. devise a clever but slightly predictable solution, transporting the weapon to the Krill ship with a redwood tree seed inside, thus speeding up the growth of the tree to destroy the ship from within. It's all very familiar, of course. The second episode is perhaps more true to what the spirit of the show will probably be like. A coming-of-age personal and professional growth story for Alara, who must captain the Orville while Mercer and his first officer Grayson are trapped aboard a giant intergalactic zoo. A simple and entertaining romp, not much surprise to be found, but it doesn't put too many feet wrong. McFarlane's comedy doesn't focus too much on making fun of the usual space sci-fi conventions we know and have come to expect. It does sometimes, but most of the jokes and interpersonal banter could really be inserted into any average sitcom, and I think that's why some people were a bit disappointed, but I think this is actually a good thing, because a show can't keep breaking the fourth wall without losing its credibility and preventing the audience from suspending their disbelief, so this was a good choice. The third episode, which I've mentioned, is the weakest of the three. Bortus's people, the Maclons, are all males, females are rarely born. So when he and his male partner give birth to a baby girl, they strongly consider gender reassignment surgery. Yes, the political correctness is present in the Orville as well, folks. It's not absolutely awful, it's somewhat tolerable. I think modern Hollywood entertainment really has been negatively affected by this crap, so I've come to expect it. No show can really escape it these days. However, it boils down to this. What TV shows have the least amount of this stuff? And when they do touch upon these subjects, how do they cover them? Hopefully on a spectrum, the Orville will focus on this kind of stuff with less frequency than something like Discovery, but time will tell. I'm hoping that McFarlane is simply paying lip service here in order to get the press and the SJWs off his back at an early point in the series and get this topic over with. To be fair, the Union, Mercer, and Grayson are initially against the child being operated on, so at least a credible stand is taken against the notion of gender surgery of a minor, in this case a newborn. But disappointingly, in the end, the Maclon Council forces the surgery anyway. So the episode ends on a very sour note, which may be too close to reality anyway, considering Canada's Bill 89 is legislation that could see the state seize children from their parents if they don't help them transition. It's alarming the episode ends like this. Nevertheless, that wasn't the worst part of the episode. The worst part was that it was simply rather boring and generally unfunny. It's not helped by the fact that it lacks a real subplot as well. But at least it's out of the way, and one dud out of 3 isn't so bad. The Orville is a show I would watch again. It feels like a big-budget Star Trek fan film comedy with likable characters. And like I say, there's no real pressure on the stories to be groundbreaking or super clever. Because it's a comedy, it just has to be fun and fairly entertaining with enough interesting sci-fi elements to keep fans happy. If it does produce a genuinely innovative plot, then so much the better. I would recommend this show to people with a caveat that they not expect too much from it. You're not going to be rolling around on the floor laughing, but you will be entertained for an hour, and if I'm honest, that's more than I can say for Star Trek Discovery.